Hello, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Barry Merrick. I'm co-founder and CEO at Ivy and the Learning Chair at YPO Metro New York. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce all of you today to Ian Bremmer. Ian, hello. How are you today?
Very well. Good to be with you. Hi, everybody.
So
hope you hear me well.
You here. And yeah, loud and clear. So in addition to being my neighbor in New York City, Ian is an incredible individual in many ways. We're going to learn a ton today. So just to give you a little bit about his background, he's one of the leading geopolitical experts of our time. He is the president and founder of Eurasia Group, which is the world's leading political risk research and consulting firm. And he's also the founder of GZERO Media. GZERO is the term that he coined to describe the global vacuum, power vacuum and leadership vacuum in the world where no country is willing or able to set an agenda. He has also created the Global Political Risk Index, GPRI. He's authored 10 books, including the New York Times bestseller, Us versus Them, The Failure of Globalism. And he also teaches at Columbia's University School of International and Public Affairs. So today, we have a very unique opportunity. Ian is on TV all the time. He's also writing op-eds on a lot of magazines. And our goal today is twofold. On the one hand, we are going to explore with Ian how we can best prepare for the future, the post-pandemic future. In addition to that, though, we're also going to discuss how we can actually create a more prosperous and peaceful world together. So to kick us off, Ian, I want to zoom all the way out and get your thoughts on helping us establish a bit of a North Star. So even if it takes a very long time to get there, do you believe that eventually we will be able to create a sustainably peaceful and prosperous world? If you do think so, what do you think will help us get there faster? And if you don't think so, what do you think are the main barriers to that?
I don't know, but I'll tell you. Well, first of all, happy to see you, Barry, and do this with all your friends in the community. I like the group that you've put together, and I know that you're working your ass off, and not least of which under these challenging times. So it's nice to be able to support it. No, I don't know, and I'm not being cute about it. I will tell you that I'm a little bit more optimistic because we finally have a crisis. We certainly weren't going to get there without a crisis. I mean, if you think about the 2008 financial crisis, that was nowhere near big enough to move vested interests away from the existing eroding institutions and policies that led to, you know, lovely President Obama. Everybody thought, well, how urbane, how smart, how handsome, what a wonderful family. He's not corrupt, but still 8 years of inequality growing. I mean, not sustainably addressing issues like healthcare or declining infrastructure or the rest. And that wasn't just the US, that was Europe too, right? I mean, America's role in the world was continuing to erode. Our interest in performing the function of global superpower was eroding, but everyone was kicking the can down the road. 2010, Eurozone crisis, same thing. So now at least we've got the biggest crisis in our lifetimes, which is going to shake us out of complacency. Now, will that crisis be suitably large, that we actually start really addressing some of these structural imbalances in terms of how many people have been displaced from our society, how many are not fundamentally being represented by democracy as we've created it? Will we redress the way we think about capitalism in a gig economy where presently 15% are unemployed, but in reality it's more like a quarter, and don't have the skill sets to be a part of a post-industrial planet? And you know, on the one hand, the political will for that is going to grow, and that's a great thing. But on the other hand, the real level of inequality and suffering is going to be so much greater than it was. So the hole we've dug ourselves into is a lot bigger. And furthermore, getting closer to my personal hobby horse, the geopolitical environment that we would need to respond in a coordinated fashion, which means leaders that actually want to row together. We're much farther away from that today and in a year from now than we were 10 or 20 years ago. When the Soviet Union collapsed, that was the moment to try to coordinate everyone behind American-led values and, you know, develop a Marshall Plan for the defeated former Eastern Bloc. We did nothing like that. The idea that we would be able to have that kind of coordination digging out of coronavirus, when actually we're heading towards a Cold War with the Chinese. We're not in one yet, but we're heading towards one. I mean, we're in the opposite direction on that front. So I had a debate with Thomas Piketty a few days ago, and he is of the view that this is what's going to bring us together. And I said, well, you know, I see the reason to feel like things will start to happen now. I mean, you know, Andrew Yang was talking about universal basic income 6 months ago, and everybody kind of poo-pooed him as a loon. And now we've got Nancy Pelosi talking about it, and the Spanish government implementing it. I mean, obviously, there are reasons to feel like there's progress on some of this stuff. Whether you like the answers or not, different story. But the challenges are getting much larger. And so it would be really wrong. It's like asking me right now, who's going to win in November? I mean, it's close to a coin flip, but at least we got a shot. I mean, there are reasons to be hopeful now in a way that you should not have been hopeful 6 months ago, because none of the conditions were in place to make you hopeful. Life was too comfortable.
Got it. Thank you so much, Ian. What's fascinating about what you said is it's all about finding those seeds of opportunity in a crisis. And it's pretty clear that you believe actually crisis can play a positive role by shaking things up and making big things happen. And everyone on this conversation who's listening in today, we're all leaders, and we're all also facing our crisis, whether it's in our organizations, personal lives, and so forth. So it's a great reminder that crisis can go either way, but there could be opportunities here for optimism. What I'd like to ask you next is really help us zone in on what you believe are the most critical themes that are driving geopolitics right now that are going to have the biggest impact. And specifically, I know there's a lot going on, but if you had to narrow it down to like the smallest list of like these themes, these things matter by far the most, and how did those themes change as a result of the pandemic? So what would you say are the key themes and what's changed?
A lot of people have asked me what's changed usually is there going to be a new global order out of the pandemic? And my answer is, well, no, it's just that no one was bothering to pay attention to how much the global order had changed in the last 10 years. I mean, so the fact that I talk about a GZERO world, an absence of global leadership, I wrote that book 10 years ago, but you had members of the establishment saying, nah, it's still the United States. Then even when Trump was elected, like, well, okay, maybe a little, but if we get rid of Trump, then it'll be okay. Then we'll go back. No. I mean, the pandemic is exposing that actually the foundation of our global house is not what we thought it was. You know, we're not up for a big tornado right now. We're more like a double wide that's going to get, you know, slammed around a bunch. So what's happening? This quote that I love from Lenin, and I don't like many things about Lenin, that there are, you know, that you've got some decades where weeks happen, but some weeks when decades happen, and that's really happening right now. I mean, in reality, you've got 18 months where you're going to see a decade of movement. So this speeding up, and all of the major geopolitical trends that matter are speeding up in that way. So, for example, questions of sustainability of the Eurozone and the ability to create a meaningful growth path for the South, bailing them out and mutualizing debt so they've got a shot coming out of this. And if not, why do they continue to support the Eurozone? That I think that everyone was aware of it, but thought you could kick that down the road kind of ad nauseum. And I think that that's probably not true. I think coming out of this crisis, that will be an existential question. I think the confrontation coming between the US and China, we all knew about it. We all wrote about Thucydides' trap, and might there be a Cold War? We saw on technology front, you were increasingly decoupling the World Wide Web. Well, now that's becoming much more urgent. And in the next 6 months, there's a very real question as to whether we will be in a Cold War with the Chinese. And Trump has his domestic reasons, and Xi Jinping has his domestic reasons. They're both under some level of pressure, given in different systems, obviously. So that would be a second one. The structural increase of inequality, which we've known has been growing since really 76, since our bicentennial, but we're now going to experience 10 years of inequality growth in 18 months. And as a consequence of that, the growth of anti-establishment sentiment, the populism, and the delegitimization of political institutions across representative democracies in the world, that's going to expand dramatically in the next 18 months. And then a fourth one would be the displacement that comes from technology companies. Bricks and mortar has been being displaced for a long time. We've talked about this fourth industrial revolution, but of course, that's now urgent. That's now happening now because no one really wanted to displace the people when they had plenty of money. They didn't want to fire all these guys. They didn't want to change their supply chains and pull out of these, emerging market countries. But now you've got to make these tough decisions right away. And the winners are the tech companies. And you don't get to talk about breaking them up. You don't get to talk about privacy. You need to talk about how are we going to use these companies to get back to work. So you're really much more towards the base of Maslow's hierarchy. And sorry, privacy is a little bit farther up here. So I think all of these basic trends that you and I, if we had done this call 6 months ago, we would have talked about all those trends. They're not new trends, but they've sped up and intensified in ways that no one would have imagined they would in a very short period of time. I'm saying 18 months because for me, I see this as a 3-year crisis and 18 months to really get to the point where you see the true turnaround in terms of people seeing a path to living their lives in a new normal, because you need the vaccine and you need a path to it being manufactured, distributed, and education around that. It doesn't need to be done, but you need that pathway. And for me, from start to that is 18 months. So that's, and then you can talk about the next 18 months of actually getting to what the new normal is going to be. So 3-year crisis, and I don't think the markets reflect that. I don't think our political leaders yet understand that. We've done a great job in the United States of providing relief in the first few months. I'm not at all clear, much better than other developed economies, Germany the exception, but I'm not at all clear that we're going to be in that position in 6 months' time when the election is hitting. So that's a worry.
Thank you so much, Ian. So with everything you said in mind, clearly none of us can fully predict the future, but if you could paint for us a picture of if the global community plays its cards right, what could be like a best case outcome with these accelerating trends, and what could be the worst case outcome if we don't play this right? Just to get your view of like what are the possible future scenarios, and then of course we'll see where actually end.
Well, the best case scenario is that the vaccine that we get isn't fought over, that there's enough money to really ramp up production around the world, and it does not feel like haves versus have-nots. I mean, sure, the poorest countries will get them last, and you won't get to rural areas as quickly as you want, but it's not US versus China versus Europe. It's actually where the big powers are getting it and getting it fast, and it looks like a collective humanity response. It's driven by science, it's driven by Bill Gates, it's driven by Antonio Guterres, it's driven by Kristalina Georgieva at the IMF, and in the shortest period of time, we are able to address this horrible, horrible virus, and we kill it. And we kill it in a short period of time. And it actually, rather than a Cold War, we see an opportunity that the best of humanity is able to functionally respond to the worst crisis of our lifetimes. And it makes us much more optimistic about things like climate change. It makes us willing to see that a new globalism is not about the super wealthy versus everybody else. Actually, it's much more about the planet. Because I mean, this is a wonderful thing about this crisis is it's an alien virus. It doesn't even come from humans. It comes from animals. So, I mean, if there was ever a crisis that we'd seen in our lifetime that you said the world should come together and fight it, it should be this. So that's the best possible outcome. Now, obviously, that's an outcome that still has humanity on the planet much worse off from an economic perspective than if it had never hit. Because you're talking about just in 2020 taking 10% out of the pot compared to where we would have been if the crisis hadn't hit. Look at where the growth would have been and where it's going to be. You're shrinking the global pie by 10%. There's no country that does better in that environment. There are no winners in that environment. But it becomes enough of a challenge that we create a new greatest generation. I mean, why is it that Americans don't give a shit about Yemen, you know, about Latin America, about the rest? And it's because, well, it's been a long time since we fought World War II. We've got a lot of Americans that have grown up with a Cold War that we kind of remember a little bit, but we won and it wasn't really a fight, and Gorbachev unwound, he sort of declared, you know, sort of defeat, and off it went, and we didn't do anything. It kind of dropped in our laps at the end of the day. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a long time ago. And so, you know, we fought a few wars that we lost, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and, you know, the average American saying, so finally we can have our World War II. We can have our greatest generation moment where the Americans, together with others around the world, actually fight the good fight. And we see that we should be leaders, not by ourselves, but together with the rest of humanity, together with our allies in the fight against coronavirus. So that's your upbeat outcome.
Thanks so much, Ian. That's a great one. And what I'd love to do is now zooming in on how you personally have been handling this crisis, just so we can get your perspectives as the owner of a firm with offices in New York and around the world, with clients ranging from heads of state to the leading CEOs of our time. How have you shifted your operations, your strategic focus, and what can we learn from that?
Well, we had 9 offices, and we now have 200, and that's a challenge because you're not getting the same level of kind of spontaneous, serendipitous human interaction that you do when these people are actually every day in a hothouse of intellectual ferment. But you are having, for better and for worse, people in front of their screens all the time. And so they're doing a lot of work. They're working hard. They're very focused. And we also are in a field, thank God, where what we're doing is very purposeful. I mean, the readership, the client engagement has been 3 times what it was right before the crisis hit. Our conference calls, people on, I mean, we have new products, but our people on conference calls in the last 2 months has been over 50 times what they were, total number of interactions, what they were in January and February after our top risk call. So typical, that's astonishing. So on the one hand, you've got that. You've got people that are very motivated, they're very engaged. You know, on the other hand, we have companies and clients that are deeply worried about what's happening, and they're engaging all the time. But we also have some clients that are not going to exist in a year. I mean, you know, we work with big airlines, you know, we work with big energy companies and suppliers. We work with big tech companies too, who are minting it right now, and that's fine. Those relationships will grow, but we'll have a lot of companies that will be gone. And so you got to manage through that. And you got to be transparent with your folks about how you're doing that. So I think what will happen is there'll be a lot more sales and a lot more business, but you'll also lose a lot of clients. That's just the reality of this kind of transition. What we're doing, massive innovation. This is the time that, you know, you need to orient, you need to try a lot of things and also be willing to really fail fast. And you can do that in, again, a very focused, intellectual, one firm environment. Everyone knows. We've got a morning meeting every day that everyone's on. And it's where we're talking about what the hell is going on. And frankly, in some of the cases, I've even seen the families like sit there and listening into the call because they're hearing from all of our top analysts around the world what's happened. It's not more valuable than CNN or Fox. So So that's great. And I tune into that every morning I possibly can. And if not, I listen to the taped version of it. It's half an hour long right afterwards. I'm not traveling. So I usually spend 50% of my time outside of New York. That's a lot of time that is available to me. Most of that time is probably now spent just catching up on research, because there is so much happening that is historically important in almost every country, every sector. So the drinking from a fire hose to stay on top of what the hell's going on right now in Brazil with an impeachment process potentially on top of massive reforms that are breaking apart, and the mishandling of this virus. Same thing with, potential constitutional issues in Germany around supporting Eurozone bailouts for the South. I mean, this is huge stuff. I mean, the U.S. every day. I mean, Michael Flynn doesn't even make it to this conversation, right? I mean, 3 months ago, that itself, the fact that it was dropped by the DOJ, would have been the single biggest headline. Not even close in this environment, not even close. And also, I mean, just my personal interactions with so many leaders, heads of state, CEOs, who normally I would see at Davos, I'd see at the Munich Security Conference, I'd see at the United Nations General Assembly, but otherwise I wouldn't talk to as much, I wouldn't see as much, because it's so hard to organize schedules. Now I actually talk to them all the time. There's a lot of WhatsApp. There's a lot of, like, on a Saturday or a Sunday in the afternoons, quick half an hour conversation with some global leader they're stuck in their house. They're not going anywhere. They want to catch up, and they want to talk. And that's the sort of thing that, I mean, I've developed a lot of relationships people that I'm very friendly towards, but I've become much closer to, because you just get that regularly when you have that kind of consistent interaction. That's clearly been true with a lot of our core CEOs as well. Some really Fortune 50 companies that normally I would see in person, but we wouldn't be doing the same. We wouldn't do video calls ever. We might do an occasional phone call before they were having a big board meeting or something. Now I've got a series of like 10 major CEOs that every 2 weeks, half an hour, I'm on, and they'll have a couple people on, I'll have a couple analysts on, but it's mostly me and that person, that man in almost every case, older white man in almost every case. And we're just catching up on what I've heard, what they've heard, and we're trying to figure this out at the same time. I will tell you that the major CEOs and the major heads of state and heads of the major international organizations are much, much more cautious and, dare I say, pessimistic about the outlook than what they're saying publicly across the board, every single one. And that's important to recognize, because we are in an environment where a lot of people are cheerleading, not least of which our president. And that has really hurt us. And I think that that's going to be a problem going forward.
Thank you so much, Ian, for sharing that window into your world. It's definitely fascinating to hear about, and very valuable as well. And when you're in addition to being a political scientist, a thought leader in this field, you're also an organizational leader, and a lot of that came through in what you just shared. I want to ask you, in this GZERO world where you see this power vacuum, what do you believe should be the role of business leaders? Of course, they have to take care of their organizations. But above and beyond that, do you think business leaders have an opportunity right now to maybe set the agenda and take a positive leading role? Or do you think there's kind of like the speed of light? Is there just like a limit on what business leaders can do given their fiduciary responsibilities?
Well, I mean, let's first of all, my own situation. I mean, I own the company. I started 23 years ago. I'm not in it for cash. So my willingness to say, fuck it, this is what we're doing in this environment is an advantage that a typical CEO would not have for a public company with shareholders. I do not want shareholders. That would be soul destroying for the kind of thing that we do in the organization. We just put out something last week called the Red Pen, this new product we're trying out, where, because, I mean, there's a lot of fact checking, but fact checking has a lot of gotcha to it. And instead, I feel like what people really need is argument checking, where people are driving arguments. You don't know if you can trust it or not. And so in a nonpartisan way, left and right, we're looking at big op-eds, and we're red penning them and just saying, okay, are these analysts, are these arguments factual? And we did one with Tom Friedman last week, and we did another one with Republican senator this week. If we were public sector and had shareholders, there is no way we would do something like that, right? Because my God, you could alienate people. Who gives a shit? You know, like we're trying to actually do something meaningful in an environment where people need it. So, and I'm president, I'm not CEO. I have a fantastic CEO, Maziar Manovi, dear friend of mine. He actually has experience managing shit. He knows how to run a company. I'm not running the company. I'm external, I'm research. I'm trying to understand how the world works, and I get to drive the organization forward in that way. So I get to be the inspirational leader while Maziar has to actually run the firm and keep the people, like, you know, informed and fed and, you know, well managed and all of that kind of stuff. So that works really well. I think that, you know, it would be really obnoxious of me to say, oh, well, other CEOs or CEOs in big firms can do that. Of course they can. And that's why I don't want to be a CEO of a big public firm. You know, it's like it's easy for me as an armchair analyst to say, well, here's what Trump should do. I don't do much of that, because you have to understand that when you're a president, you know, you have so many constraints, real constraints in what you can say and what you can do and how the bureaucracy works and how you can steer the ship. And that makes me less emotionally damaged, I think, by Trump than a lot of the analysts that are out there right now. I think being in a bigger organization and seeing the constraints and what you can and can't do after you've constructed your life as well as you possibly can professionally makes you more appreciative of what you have given up, right? And what you don't want to do. I think big CEOs in this environment are going to be, with small exceptions, are going to be under more pressure and more financial constraint than at any time in their professional lifetimes. They are going to be trying just to keep their people employed. They're going to try just to keep their firms from being bankrupt. And if they go bankrupt, they're going to work really hard to try to keep the conditionality from being really onerous and using their government relations, their lobbying power, everything else. And so the idea that those companies are going to step into the breach that is being left by a social contract that doesn't work, that's inadequate from the governments, there is no way. Now, there will be exceptions. And certainly, I mean, there will be technology companies out there that are minting it that hopefully will be better corporate citizens in this environment, especially because they'll be functionally regulating themselves. And I hope, and I'm certainly trying to help steer and advise some of them that I'm close to thinking about and taking some of those decisions. But most companies are not going to be in that position. Most companies are now facing the worst experience of their lifetimes, and they're going to be laying off a shit ton of people. And that is not when you're thinking about, oh, how can I also be a corporate citizen for all of these new stakeholders that I wasn't thinking about a year ago. That's just not happening.
Thank you so much, Ian. Great perspective. So what I want to do now, you have a widely followed 60-second segment that you do. And I want to do a version of that now where I will just get your thoughts just for a minute on each one in key areas. And just so everybody gets an idea of like, what are your key perspectives on things that are top of mind for many of us. So 1 minute on each of these and we'll just fly through them. We have some amazing audience questions coming in. So everyone participating live, if you have questions, this is the time. Please try to type them up in the next 5 minutes or so, and we'll jump into them shortly. So Ian, our 1 minute predictions for the future round. Let's start with the economy. What do you think is going to happen?
Much worse than people expect, particularly in the emerging markets, the middle income emerging markets, not Africa, but you know, Brazil, India, Mexico, Turkey. I think a lot of countries are going to be they're going to have debt burdens they won't deal with. You'll see defaults. You'll see financial crashes probably in 2021. The potential for that to metastasize into the weaker developed country banks is real. And again, this is a 3-year economic crisis.
Excellent. Thank you, Ian. Next one, the nation states on borders. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, this is an anti-globalization event. I mean, we're not traveling around the world. We're sheltering in place. That leads to more nativism, more tribalism, more nationalism. Borders go up. I think that there will be less globalization on the back of this. Supply chains will become more localized, but more fragmented, which means that the US will be less interdependent with China, some of our allies less interdependent, but other poorer countries will be more dependent on China, like Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, East and Southern Europe, and South America.
Excellent. Thank you, Ian. Just generally, war and peace and conflicts going forward. What's your prediction?
Probably a little bit less fighting in some of the major conflicts in the coming months. Like you look at Afghanistan or Pakistan, India, generally see less shooting when the weather's really horrible because people are hunkered down. Exposure to a dangerous disease does the same kind of thing as really bad storms. So less of that, but still the potential for implosion of regimes like, Iran or Venezuela that could lead to civil war with oil in, prices in the floor right now and all on top of massive recession. That's growing. And certainly accidents, if Kim Jong-un had died from US, China, and South China Sea, accidents escalating, those things are becoming more likely.
Thank you so much, Ian. Let's talk about democratic ideals, freedom of speech, these kinds of things, civil rights. Where do you think these are going?
Democratic ideals are weakening, but that's because of the GZERO. I mean, in a world where China is becoming the largest economy, and that's happening faster, remember, their economy is flat this year. US and Europe is contracting significantly, so they're going to be the largest economy faster. They do not support democracy. They are an authoritarian state capitalist country. So the conditionality around that, especially when the state drives capitalism in China, but also externally, moves more. And that's even before you talk about the United States, the Europeans feeling more disenfranchised, lots of the population. So lower common denominator around things like democracy, civil society, and human rights on a global basis. But American institutions they're not about to break. We're not about to become an authoritarian regime here or in Germany and France. Hungary, maybe. But in general, I think that's overstated.
Thank you so much. What about populism?
Growing. I mean, on the back of it, it was growing when we had a bull market. It's obviously when you suddenly have a bear market and the people that are getting most hurt, most exposed to the virus, most exposed in terms of their jobs going away are those lower middle classes, not just in the developed world, but also the emerging middle class across the developing world. That will exacerbate populism dramatically.
And your views on inequality?
Same.
Okay, thank you. What about ideologies? Which ideologies do you think might be getting stronger? Which one's getting weaker as a result of?
I think that one of the biggest problems we have in the world right now is that you don't have global ideologies that are really driving people to become more hopeful. Perhaps the only one that you can really talk about is Yuval Harari and techno-utopianism, which is, one that I particularly oppose because it only applies to such a small sector of humanity. It's kind of, globalism 2.0 and will lead to an even stronger backlash against it. My hope is that what you will see is more of a true grassroots globalism that we're already seeing emerge among younger people around the world dealing with climate. And Greta Thunberg, when I was at Davos this year, that's what everybody was talking about. And of course, now she's under lockdown, so no one talks about Greta anymore. But the issue hasn't gone away. And I'm actually fairly hopeful that that will be more of a driving ideology that brings people together over the coming years.
And that was actually my next one. So what's your prediction on climate change in general? Will the pandemic actually lead us to take it more seriously or put it on the back burner?
We're definitely going to take it more seriously, though. I mean, not this year. And we're not even having the COP meeting in the UK because people can't get together and it's not the priority. But that hasn't slowed down investments in, in environment-oriented ETFs for BlackRock, for example, at all. The energy companies, the fossil fuel companies are doing very badly right now. The tech companies most oriented towards driving that agenda are doing very well. Plus, climate will continue to become a bigger and bigger problem, even with the reduction of emissions. I mean, you can see how much the global economy contracting has done, and how limited the impact that is on actual climate emissions, it shows you the scale of the challenge, that the human suffering that comes from climate displacement and from extreme climate conditions is only structurally growing in the coming years. And I believe that that is going to be met with very serious response. It's nice to see that in Europe, a big piece of the stimulus that's coming down the pike is going to be directly related to a green agenda. Not clear that'll happen in the United States. That will depend in part on the election. But I think this is structural. I don't think you can put the genie back in the bottle here.
Thank you so much, Ian. That was excellent. We've got close to 40 questions here from the audience. So let's keep the pace that we're on. And I'm going to shoot over these questions to you one by one as I see them. So first question is from Armando Beltran. He asks, please tell us about a very controversial point you hold that many other pundits would actually dismiss. Could be around any economic, political, or social.
Well, the easy one is that Trump doesn't matter that much. I mean, you know, you would never know that from reading the pundits. I mean, they spend 80, 90% of their time, the US pundits, talking about Trump and his tweets and his press conferences and everything else. And I mean, he's a very divisive figure. He's a particularly non-competent figure as president. The presidents never matter that much in the United States. And you know, what everyone had been saying beforehand is this guy, if he wins again, we're going to have an authoritarian regime. Actually, the one time that if you really wanted to grab power, it would be in a massive crisis like this. I mean, that's what Viktor Orban is doing, right? Duterte, even in the Philippines, trying to use this crisis to consolidate power. We've got the biggest crisis in our lifetimes. What's Trump doing? He's saying, not my responsibility. It's the governor's. We're not going to do a test on every street corner. We're the backstop for ventilators. We're not going to coordinate this response. Governor's I've got the authority. The governors have to do it. So, I mean, I am not someone who believes that the American president, least of all this president, is actually a very significant piece of what we should be analyzing right now. Most, I would say the vast majority of US pundits disagree with me about that. Some of them because they hate him so much emotionally and they can't disassociate themselves from that, their analytic selves from that. And some of it because, frankly, it's easily profitable. It drives a lot of views, a lot of clicks, if you're focusing on the circus and playing into it. And they're very useful to him as a consequence of that.
Thank you so much, Ian. Here's a great one from Rima Halawi. She says, in quotes, "We're all in the same storm, but not on the same boat. In high-income countries, the choice to be made is lives versus economy and money. In low to middle-income countries, the choice to be made is lives versus lives. The gap between the have and have-not countries will be even greater than it is now. How do we rebuild the fabric of society after this?"
Yeah, well, I mean, the fact that, as I said at the beginning, this is a much bigger crisis. 2008, 2009, we had the Occupy Wall Street movement, was limited to the developed economies, and we ignored it within a year. The crisis was over for the wealthy people. The banks got bailed out. Detroit got bailed out. The shareholders were on the rebound. We felt pretty good. Meanwhile, inequality in the West continued to become greater and greater under 8 years of Obama and now 3 years of Trump. That's never slowed down. In fact, it's only intensified. So now that's not only is that getting much, much more intense in the developed world, let's leave aside Japan, which is an outlier, but it's also going to become a much bigger issue in the developing world. And you see that in reactions, particularly in Latin America, but other countries too. And so the hope will have to be that together with a lot of companies going bankrupt, a lot of shareholders realizing that their business models aren't as sustainable medium or long term if they don't have consumers that can actually buy from them. So, I mean, the hope is that this crisis is big enough that it starts addressing really the biggest structural challenge that we've been facing in the last 50 years, which has been that globalization creates an immense amount of wealth, but very unequally distributed. And so as a consequence, many of us around the world are now saying we oppose globalization. we will vote for Trump. We will vote for Sanders. We will vote for Brexit. We will vote for the AFD or for the Lega or for the National Front or for any of these organizations, because you are lying to us, because the people that we have voted for and the mainstream media that has abetted them and the CEOs and the bankers that have profited mightily from having them captured by their lobbying dollars and their special interests, you are all just taking care of yourselves, not taking care of me. And if you're not going to take care of me and my family, screw you. I'm going to support something else. So have we reached enough pain and enough of a tipping point where that will be addressed? I have no doubt in my mind that we're going to see higher taxation in the United States as a consequence of that. But I will say that the first few months of economic response by the US government does not give me a lot of hope. That, you know, we're spending an inordinate amount of money, but most of it is being spent to try to ensure that the existing system isn't changed very much. And, you know, Bernie Sanders is not the Democratic presumptive nominee. It's Biden. And if you look at his search committee for VP, kind of tells you that Elizabeth Warren is not likely to be the VP. So, I mean, the United States probably not moving very much in that direction. Not clear to me that the Germans, I mean, the Germans will do a lot for Germany, but are they going to mutualize debt for the Italians or the Spaniards or the Greeks? I mean, if they don't, that's kind of the same problem. I mean, you know, Europe is just kind of like a version of the United States. They happen to be a bunch of different countries, but the poorer countries are just as screwed. And unless you redistribute, it's not fixable. So there should be a bunch of people that want to destroy it. I thought that the Brexit vote was a very rational vote. It sucks for the UK as a whole. It sucks for wealthy city Londoners. But again, if you're screwed either way, I mean, then at least say, I want to break the system, because maybe then people will pay attention to you. It's like Abby Hoffman's Steal This Book. You know, I mean, that was 1 year before I was born, but you know, that stuff, as someone who grew up in the projects and whose mother read the National Enquirer every week and didn't graduate from high school, I mean, she would have voted for Trump or for Bernie. She's not with us anymore. I can't ask her. My brother voted for Trump. There's no question in my mind. I mean, all those kids that grew up with me in the projects, completely, this stuff resonates with them. That's why my last book was called Us Versus Them, The Failure of Globalism. Globalism's been great for me. Shit. I mean, I started my own company and I became really rich. How awesome. But it doesn't work for most people. And it's completely dishonest intellectually for me to sit here and pretend that the system that did so well for me is actually remotely reasonable or fair for most people. It's just not.
Thank you so much, Ian, and thank you, Rima, for that great question. All right, in a minute or less, the next question: will the European Union survive this pandemic, or will countries start splitting off?
Yeah, there's going to be, I think, an existential crisis that'll be much larger than the Greek financial crisis in the next 2 or 3 years, and it could well lead to an unwind. I wouldn't bet on it right now. I think that they will actually find a way to stop the Italians from creating a parallel currency, certainly stop the Germans from leaving themselves if there's a big crisis. But there's a real possibility of that happening that a year ago, no one considered plausible in the next few years.
Thank you so much, Ian. Here's one from Jem Tufekci. He asks, decoupling of financial markets and Main Street in the US, will this continue, or is there another big dip in the financial markets?
The decoupling is certainly going to continue because it's all on the back of the Fed. The Fed has a lot of capacity, and the dollar is still the world's reserve currency. I don't see those things changing. So huge decoupling between the Main Street economy and the Wall Street economy, that's going to grow. But then you said, well, does that mean the S&P won't have another dip? No, you can see decoupling. There could still be more dips in the S&P. The consensus in the banking environment is very decoupled on that, and the banking community is considerably more optimistic than the IMF, and I am much closer to the IMF in my economic projections for the next year, 2 years.
Thank you so much, Ian. Here's one from Kent Ford. He asks, how do you see the future of international development post-COVID? Do you believe the richer countries will maintain, increase, or decreasing funding and assistance for developing and emerging countries?
I think they'll increase. In fact, no, I know they'll increase because I'm quite close to the head of the IMF, and we talk personally all the time. and she's asking for more support and she's getting it. It will be nowhere near the hole that needs to be filled for the developing markets, particularly the poorest developing markets, to be able to get their heads above water. So they're going to suffer a hell of a lot more than we are.
Thank you very much. Tyler Dalsaid asks, what countries will form the core of the new American inner circle of?
Well, I mean, Canada and Mexico, because, I mean, they're overwhelmingly dependent on the US economy, tourism, remittances, trade, that kind of thing. Japan, overwhelmingly dependent on the US for our military security umbrella. Australia, same kind of way, plus they're strongly racist against Chinese, and that aligns them with us. The wealthier Europeans on the tech side don't yet understand that they're going to be completely stuck with the Americans and not the Chinese, but they will as the tech Cold War comes to fruition. Those and Central America would be, I would say, the core of the countries that will be most aligned with the US.
Thank you so much, Ian. Here's one from Neil Kililia. He asks, where would Ian invest today, given his view on the next 3 years?
Here, I mean, you know, reserve currency not going away, tech companies by far the most important, largest energy producer in the world, largest food exporter in the world, geographically distant from all the arms races and the migrants and terrorism. I mean, there are lots of countries out there that look very good compared to others in their space, but in a risk-off environment going forward, I would stay US.
Thanks so much, Ian. Here's one from Gunjan Doshi. With both parties talking anti-China talk, what is going to happen to US-China relations? How is it going to impact the US economy?
Well, if we have a Cold War, it's going to impact China a lot worse than the US. They're much more reliant on us. We have a lot more power than they do. But we shouldn't want a Cold War. I don't know. I mean, Trump said last night, no, excuse me, he said this morning, I was actually talking to Brian Kilmeade this morning, and he had just called in to Fox and Friends, as he is wont to do. And Brian was telling me that he really got the sense from the president this morning that Trump literally doesn't know what to do in terms of the phase 1 trade deal. I think that's right. I think that Trump right now knows that if he breaks the phase 1 trade deal, he's going to have to impose significant additional tariffs on consumer goods that are going to hurt the very people that are part of the core of his voting bloc. So he doesn't want to do it. But if his popularity goes from 45 blended down to 30s or 20s, which in my view is likely in the next few months, because, you know, our death toll in the United States is, I don't know why the hell the ultimate cheerleader Trump decided that he wanted to say, go from 100,000 to 60,000. He does not protect his downside at all. Now he's got to go back up to 100,000. As he said, if it's under 100,000, it's going to be a win. It's going to be over 100,000 deaths before November. That plus the economy is going to be in much worse shape. He's done everything he can to say, not my fault, it's the governors, it's Obama, it's anything else. But he's going to take massive abuse for this. And so, I mean, the big juicy target is China, because they are responsible for the initial virus, and they covered it up, while 5 million Chinese left Wuhan and 400,000 left the country. So I understand, I mean, any American president would be blaming China for this, any American president. But not any American president would break the phase 1 trade deal or would move towards a Cold War. Not any American president would say, we have intelligence saying it's coming from a lab, when we don't, and our allies, even Australia, are saying, no, you really don't. That's kind of stupid, and it's very risk acceptant. But Trump is running for election, and I think his willingness to be risk acceptant when he knows he might lose, you know, you don't want to be a president running during the worst recession of your lifetime. Again, let's be clear. I mean, Trump has made a lot of mistakes in terms of his response to the pandemic, but the recession is not one of them. I mean, if Obama was president, recession would be just as big. Okay, not as many people would die. I do believe that. We would have been faster. We wouldn't have cheerleaded as much. We would have had more testing early. But the economy would be hit just as bad. It don't matter that it's not Trump's fault. He is going to be blamed for that, right? He gets the benefit of the fact that the economy was doing better when he first became president, even though he did nothing. He gets hurt when the fact that the global economy and the US economy is taking such a massive dump. So of course his approval ratings are going to get whacked like hell. And I don't know how he isn't going to go after China. I expect that he's going to do that in spades.
Thank you so much, Ian. All right, we've got a few more. So 1 minute or less on Mark Pelletier's question. He asks, what do you think are the biggest discrepancies between what people think the future will look like and reality regarding the economic and social impact of the pandemic?
I just think most people think that it's going to come back the way it was, because we have a peak of 3 months. And so they think, okay, then if it's a peak of 3 months, then it goes down, and 3 months later, we kind of get back to sort of what it was like. So restaurants will open. It's going to be annoying for another 3 months. Maybe we'll lose the summer, but next year we'll come back. No, like we're just not going. I think it's 3 years. And I think until we have a vaccine that is developed, that is distributed globally with education campaign around it, you are not going to see the kind of behaviors that we had before. And when you do have all of that, a lot of companies that you used to have are gone. And a lot of the companies that are still there are operating very differently. So I think our worlds our way of life is changing from this. Some of those things will be permanent. You can already see some of it happening. You will have a different view of what is an essential trip that you might take. You'll have a different view of what is an essential kind of entertainment that you might engage in. You'll have a different view of, even basic social interactions. Maybe we never shake hands again. Maybe casual dating and sex changes, right? I mean, this is going to make people think very, very differently. This will be the most meaningful impact, not just on the generation that grew up with it, but really kind of everyone that's gone through it. I think will change in some fundamental ways.
Thank you so much, Ian. There's a lot of questions that are region specific. So we spoke a bit about the EU, a bit about China. Could you talk a little bit also about the Middle East and other important kind of flashpoints in the world, and any predictions you'd make in terms of like how those regions are going to react to this and how they're going to end up after this?
Well, the Middle East is much less important to the US. And so, I mean, whoever's the president will be paying less attention to it, fewer troops over time. The Saudis are in this massive oil fight, but they've got deep pockets. They can handle it. They can get through it for a year or two, which is probably what they need. There will be other countries. I mean, Lebanon is not going to get the money from the Gulf states, and they're in very deep financial trouble right now. They're finally being honest with their population about how bad it is, but you're going to see more rioting in Lebanon. Now, they like demonstrations in Lebanon. They're very good at it. They're some of the most fun. They're very entertaining. There's a lot of live music. But you could have a civil war in Lebanon. Algeria, you could have a civil war in Algeria. I mean, there are definitely some countries that are in much greater, Iran could implode, even though they've got massive capacity to repress, but they're in serious trouble. They finally took 3 zeros off their currency, which is smart, because who wants to pay 20,000 bucks for a pizza? You want to pay 20 bucks for a pizza, right? So they take 3 zeros off. Doesn't feel so bad. But they've got a lot of problems. There are a lot of countries, a lot of problems out there, really. It's kind of nice to live in the country that you think, I mean, everyone's going crazy how bad America is. Oh my God, I'm so glad I live in America. I'm so glad I live in New York. Why would you possibly live anywhere else? I mean, New Zealand, okay, but they won't let us in because they're not stupid. But of those countries that would let us in, this is a good place to be.
Thank you so much, Ian. Here's one from Brett Keith. He says 2 quick things. 1, I feel validated by you dropping the F-bomb. 2,
nice. That's why I'm here, is to validate you. Jesus Christ.
Second one, while many say we will figure it out later, hasn't the likelihood of the debt bomb blowing up in our face increased meaningfully in the US, let alone in Europe, as you mentioned?
Yeah, but again, more for other places than in the United States, in my view. Again, the value of having the reserve currency and the leverage doesn't just come from the debt. The leverage also comes from America providing the security umbrella. So if the Japanese try to sell all of our paper, and they're the largest holder externally, we're like, oh, okay, well, I guess you don't need us to defend you anymore. The Americans have a lot of leverage like that. When we start making all the tech rules for other countries around the world, when it's our vaccine, I mean, there are just lots of ways to leverage when you're the world's largest economy, and that doesn't go away even when you're massively indebted. I mean, our grandkids will not appreciate what we're doing right now, but they might not even have a planet. So why do we care? That's By the way, on the F-bomb side, you know, I do Bill Maher a lot, and I view like Ivy as kind of the equivalent of doing Bill Maher. So I mean, I didn't even shave for this. I usually shave every day, but I looked at my schedule today and it's like, it's a bunch of bilateral meetings where they know me really well and you guys. So, I mean, if I can't drop an F-bomb for this, what am I doing here? Right? Really? I mean, it's not like Barry's paying me for this appearance. So come on.
Thank you so much, Ian. I actually spent quite a bit of time on hair and makeup before going live today. But again,
I actually
this is
believe that. But you know, I mean, the funny thing is, like, so I haven't cut my hair in 8 weeks now, and you haven't dyed your beard in 8 weeks now. And this is, I mean, this is, I assume we're doing this because we want to show people that we have some solidarity for those that are truly suffering.
That's absolutely right. Well, Ian, this has been wonderful. So to wrap this up in the last couple of minutes we have, I want to ask you, obviously there's tons of questions that we didn't quite get to, although I do think we covered the general themes. I want to ask you, how can our audience best engage with you on an ongoing basis? But also, how can we best support you and your endeavors? So you're doing a lot of great work, staying objective and really pushing people to do their best selves in everything that you do. So how can we best support you? And after that, I just want to ask you to wrap up by sharing one final piece of wisdom. If there was one thing you would tell us to start doing perhaps differently or think about doing differently starting tomorrow, what would that be?
You know, for the Ivy folks out there, younger, engaged intellectually, care about the world, you know, we put out now, I started a media company a couple years ago. It includes a free daily newsletter called Signal. You can all sign up for it. It's a lot of fun. It is honest as hell. It's a little snarky. You can sign up for it at GZEROmedia.com. It also has all of our streaming videos and our television show and the puppet show and everything else. I think you'll like that. That's an easy thing to do. For those of you on the YPO side or running organizations that want to engage with Eurasia Group as a company, you can check us out at eurasiagroup.net. We have a client newsletter that you can subscribe to individually. We can also engage, and Barry can send something out that you can show who you can get in touch with in our organization if you're not yet a client, and you should be. We got about 1,200 clients around the world, and obviously we're not turning away business right now, so more than happy to welcome you.
Thank you, Ian. That was great. And any final word of wisdom? What would you challenge us to do starting later today, starting tomorrow?
I mean, this is a group that shouldn't need this advice, but if there was ever a time that you were wondering, I'm doing something I'm not really passionate about, I'm doing something that doesn't feel like it makes a difference in the world, this is a good time to stop. This is a good time. You're at home, you're spending time thinking, what is the thing that how are you going to change, you know, the orientation of your avocation to be meaningful to you, to be aligned with who you are, your passion. I mean, I got to tell you, I mean, I'm a very social and extroverted person. I get energy from other people. There is no way I would be able to get through 6 months, 3 months of this unless I was incredibly passionate about the thing I spend the most time in my life doing. All of us do, our jobs. We spend more time working than we do even sleeping, never mind with our spouses, our partners, our families, the rest. So if you're not really passionate about that, you are losing a hell of a lot. And I think it takes a non-existential but real crisis like this to make people really question that, think about that. So, but again, the great thing about your group, Barry, is most of the people that are signed up kind of already know that, and you're a great example of it by what you've done and about how you spend your time. So, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons we get on as well as we do. So, you know, I hope that people take a little bit of you know, of example from that, and do more of it. So many people ask me, I saw that one of the questions you said, do I ever want to be in public service? Do I ever want to like be in government? No, I want to advise these people what I really think. I want to be able to speak publicly and honestly, because a part of me would die if I didn't do that anymore. I'd be unhappy. I get people all the time asking me would I be interested in working for X team or Y team. And the answer is no. I think you have to know yourself well enough to be honest about the answer to those things. So you not only know when to grasp the brass string, but also when to say no. Saying no to opportunities is so much more important than saying yes to opportunities. It's so much harder to do. And you need an active filter for that. probably works in dating life too for the Ivy folks. But I only really have business giving you guys a level of advice on the professional side.
Thank you so much, Ian. That was a truly galvanizing call to action for all of us. I really appreciate it. Also, thank you for your energy, your insights. Keep up the amazing work, and really appreciate you being here. All the best for now.
Good to see you, dude. Be good, everybody.
Good seeing you. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. All the best.